research. And so we're moving to a new paradigm. So with this inquiry, this Indigenous Inquiry and Impact Colloquium Series, we prioritize Indigenous and Indigenous ally scholars to center Indigenous voices and Indigenous matters. And by inquiry, we don't just mean Western scientific notions of research and empirical studies. We're talking about inquiry in a much broader sense, and in fact, embracing an Indigenous paradigm and Indigenous ways of knowing for the kind of work we do. And so the Inquiry and Impact Colloquium Series, Bridging Knowledge and Community, we need to be mindful of how what we do at IIK and IUB generally is intimately an inquiry impact interrelationship with all the responsibilities meaningful relationships entail. So that's our series, and I want to now, we're so fortunate to have Keitlyn and Ryan here to present and give us some ideas about their own work, but also warm us up for Maize Gathering in October 17th and 18th. Right? So Ryan Conway, the proud citizen of the Shawnee Tribe, and we're also fortunate to have him as an IIK research associate. And as a Shawnee agriculturalist, Ryan is a seasoned community organizer, farmer, and independent researcher with extensive experience in food systems and policy governance. He actively engages in tribal life by teaching the Shawnee language and cultivating ceremonial corn while researching and preserving traditional medicine and foodways. With a rich background spanning academic research, nonprofit leadership, and small business ownership, Ryan applies a holistic and integrative approach to research design and project execution, fostering innovative and community-centered solutions. And Dr. Keitlyn Alcántara is an assistant professor in the anthropology department here at Indiana University, and she's an anthropological bioarchaeologist who analyzes foodways as tools of empowerment. In her research, Dr. Alcántara combines bioarchaeological dietary isotope analyses and ethnographic interviews to contextualize food sovereignty movements in Mexico. Professor Alcántara's research goals emphasize the importance of interweaving academic and grassroots work to create impactful social change. She is deliberately challenging power hierarchies that value academic experts above community knowledge keepers, and is consciously working to equitably join academic research and community interests. So please join me in welcoming you. Of course, help yourself to more food and good. So I'll turn it over to you, and Tara will share the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many friendly faces, new faces. And we, in the spirit of collaborative research, we're going to be taking turns throughout this PowerPoint, going back and forth between kind of our different perspectives and approaches. Before I get started, I want to thank everybody who has made both this presentation and the Maize Gathering that we're going to be talking about at the end of the presentation possible. IU Native American and Indigenous Studies Program, the Ostrom Workshop, the IU Institute for Advanced Study, Environmental Resilience Institute, Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, La Casa, Institute for Indigenous Knowledge, Modern Greek Program, Institute for European Studies, First Nations Education and Cultural Center, Department of Geography and Anthropology, the Center for Research on Race and Ethnicity, the Office of the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, Hutton Honors College, Hilltop Garden and Nature Center, and Sobre Mesa Foundation. And I want to center those at the beginning because it is really exciting to me that so many people are interested in this and willing to support it, especially right now when we have such pressure to limit the ways that we're spending financial resources within the university. And I think in pulling together this idea of the Maize Gathering, it's been giving me a lot of hope for how many places see value, both in terms of like monetary investment, but just coming together, sharing space, eating together, being in the same room and having these conversations at this moment in time.
Yeah. And also, of course, it's always important to acknowledge where we are, you know, not just at the IIK, not just at IU, but these are the ancestral homelands of many tribes, the Miami, the Delaware, the Potawatomi, the Shawnee, the Wayas, the Kaskaskias, the Piankashas. These are their once and future homelands. And as a Shawnee, being able to return to homelands and be able to be in an academic setting and grow corn at the same time, it's a special gift for myself. And it's a great blessing to have all these like-minded people here. So thank you for letting us acknowledge these lands that we're on.
Thank you. I don't know what this is. There we go. All right. So just to give you a heads up about where we're headed with this presentation, we're going to be starting by talking about what led up to this Maize Gathering coming together. Thank you. And then a little bit of kind of how maize has been the bridge that connects Mesoamerican and North American corn histories and beyond. All of the people who are involved in this event are coming from stories and relationships that are both tied to national identities, to cultural identities from all around the world. And then we will introduce the Healing Garden and how it brought Ryan and my work together, and then tell a little bit about what to expect for the Maize Gathering, who's coming, and all of that information. So we're going to start. I think that got kind of pushed out of the way, but we're going to start by looking at this history of maize that kind of spreads through both of our work. Like Richard mentioned, I started out as an archaeologist. My family is from central Mexico and from the US, and I grew up in both places. I returned to Mexico as an archaeologist and started working in Tlaxcala, doing what Richard described, bioarchaeological projects, looking at ancient foodways. But through the course of that research, I think I kind of started unlearning all of these research practices that were taught to me within the institution, and started realizing how much I needed to learn from the community partners that I was working with. So I work specifically in Tlaxcala, Mexico. This is a very small state, right 2 hours east of Mexico City here. And it is the center of a lot of food sovereignty movements right now. I started working there because it was a place that has a strong history of resistance. The Tlaxcaltecas resisted the Aztec Empire. They were one of the only states in central Mexico to do so. When the Spanish arrived, they strategically allied with them and then created an indigenous state within New Spain. And today, campesinos, farmers from Tlaxcala continue to resist transnational corporations and have been one of the primary organizers to create laws against GMO corn being able to be planted in the state and planted in the country. Yeah. So it's not a coincidence that these things are all kind of connected to one another. And so while I started looking at ancient foodways, and one of the things that came out of that research was seeing how much this relationship to ecological networks, so living networks that are beyond human, how those help to support communities being able to be resilient and being able to adapt to all of these attacks that were coming at once. Yeah, and so from this, I have been learning about maize as this metaphor, but also really real framework for how to think about the way we move through the world, and the way that we relate to more than human networks that we are a part of through our food, through our ecological systems, but also how maize teaches us ways to be in relationship with one another, interact with one another, share with one another, listen to one another, listen to more than human beings as well. In Tlaxcala and in Mesoamerica, the main kind of way of engaging with maize is through the milpa. The milpa is, in an agricultural kind of sense, this intercrop system of all of these different types of plants that grow together. So there's the corn at the center, but it's also held up by other domesticas like maize, beans, squash, jalapeno, or peppers, and things like that. But also things that grow in between those. So wild plants that pop up and help the soils and help pollinators, and things that are adapting outside of kind of the direct sight line of humans who are really focused on the domesticated crops. There's all of this other life adapting, adjusting as well. And this is one of the things that in my research, I've talked with a lot of people about how that creates really rich resilience and capacity to adapt to change, because humans aren't operating on their own. They're operating in this really rich network of life. And I think that that is a perspective that is repeated in a lot of different Indigenous kind of worldviews. And that the way that we tap into this network, the way that we're aware of it, really shapes how we are capable of kind of adapting as well. Some main characteristics that I'm pulling from this are this idea of interspecies networks of support, more than human-led rhythms and teachings. So not necessarily operating at the rhythm of the semester, but paying attention to things like the rhythm of the moon, the rhythm of the seasons, how those shape our bodies and give us energy or deplete us or make us more prone to illness in certain times of the year. This idea of cyclical time and non-urgency. So again, kind of pushing back at this rhythm that we're forced into in these spaces of a semester, and like you only meet somebody for the class that you're in with them and then they disappear from your life, and trying to create these relationships that are a lot richer within a space that is really pushing us to be really disjointed and ruptured. And thinking of values that we want to center that aren't necessarily things like a degree, things like making money, but values like having long-term, deep relationships to one another, understanding how our stories are connected, understanding how that interconnection makes us able to support each other during times of crisis. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about the Healing Garden, but this is kind of the space of praxis that I and my colleagues have developed here on campus. It's located in the Hilltop Garden and Nature Center, and you're welcome to drop by today from 4 to 7. We have open hours and you can come visit if you'd like to. But this was kind of an experiment to see how taking some of these lessons from my work in central Mexico with farmers there and trying to recreate spaces where we could practice some of this interconnectivity here could shift the ways that we interact with one another within this institutional setting. So that kind of sets up how Ryan and I met. And so I'm going to pass this over to Ryan, and I'm very excited to hear all that you're going to talk about. How these mazes that came from central Mexico made their way up here and have started to shape kind of this crossover between these spaces that a lot of times are seen as very disparate.
So yeah, there's a lot of people here in Indiana, especially that grow up with a different kind of culture around corn. And so what I'm just going to explain is a little bit of the indigenous background of corn in the so-called United States, and then also the process by which theft of indigenous seed and the breeding of indigenous seed into commercialized and industrialized products has driven social organization and economic organization around industrialized corn, kind of almost as a mutation of the original relationship. So much of industrialization and capitalization create these separations that distance us from the grounding Kikina Hasiskita, our Mother Earth, and the grounding with Tamina Kethi, our Mother Corn. And so one of the things that I found most attractive about Keitlyn's work and about the Healing Garden is that it is a space where this separation is undone. It's a space where that separation can be rebridged and regrounded in actual practice with all sorts of people in all sorts of life ways. And part of our partnership has to do with the planting of, many of you were here for this and helped plant this corn, the Tenskwatawa corn, which is a corn of many corns that was born out of a religious and socio-political movement in the early 1800s, led by a Shawnee man, Tenskwatawa, who we call the prophet, and his brother, Tecumseh, who was a war chief and war leader of the Northwestern Indian Alliance. But this is just an example of our corn. This is not the corn that is being grown at the Healing Gardens right now, because this is ceremonial and only Shawnee folks can touch it. However, this is actually a ceramic replica that was made for the IU Museum, and there's several of them on display in the museum right now. But I wanted just to have this both as a comfort object and also to pass around so that folks could just see, what Shawnee ceremonial corn looks like and get a sense of why it's so present to us. So as you can see with the presentation, corn has a very long history, an ancient history. It emerged in the Balsas River Valley in Mexico, in the southwest of Mexico, between 6,000 and 9,000 years ago. So it's very ancient, and what we know from genetic isotope analysis and microsatellite analysis in corn genomes is that it really did cluster originally emergent from just one place in the Balsas River Valley. It wasn't like a simultaneous emergence kind of thing. It really is concentrated. And what we can see is that this is a kind of a progression from teosinte, the grass, all the way up into like a what we would consider like a proto corn. So like this goes from the more ancient to the more modern. And of course, the corn that you see and the corn that you're used to seeing gets further down that scale. But the term teosinte, the grass that was the main plant from which humans in relationship with this plant cultivated what we now call maize or corn, actually is a Nahuatl word for teosinte, which means the grass of the gods. So it has always had a sacred place for Indigenous people, both in Mesoamerica and, as we will see, up into the contemporary United States. But before we get to the spread of the contemporary United States, I just wanted to show this graphic about how corn has spread in both North and South America. As you can see, like the locus of corn's emergence is right here near the Balsas River Valley, and some more typical specialized subspecies of corn in Mexico still reside more in central Mexico, but there's been evolution and dispersion. A lot of the evolution has taken place just because of human interaction with the corn. I mean, corn isn't something that just evolved on its own. It doesn't live by itself. It always lives in relation to us. And it's because we cherish it and because we love it and because we find sacred speech and power in this corn. That is why so many Indigenous peoples across the Americas and across the world have taken to corn. There is a spiritual power embedded in this plant, and that comes from our relationship with Mother Earth. It comes from the corn being a mediator between us and Mother Earth and the rest of the environment. This is graph heavy, but basically all it is to make the punch that the origin of corn is in Mexico between 4,000 and 7,000 BC, and it first established in the United States around 2,100 BC in Arizona and New Mexico. So it took several thousand years for it to work its way up. But again, it did take hold in the Southwest United States first, around 2,100 BC. It also made its way up into the Midwest around 50 BC, and then upper into the Great Lakes regions around 540 CE, further on into Ontario by 550, and then in New York about 500 years later in 1000 CE. All of this just kind of depicting the different ways that corn has traversed different spaces and has been adapted by different people. It takes corn about 5 to 9 years to adapt and evolve to a specific space. It's a process called land racing. But so part of the slowness of the process is that humans are very aware of their relationships, with our plant relatives, and corn being so prized, we gave it special attention. And so when it was brought to a new environment, it took us time and slow relation to help it to adapt through selection of various qualities, help it to adapt to its new ecosystems, ecotomes, and other bioregions. So there is some archaeological debate exactly on the vector by which corn crossed from the Southwest through the plains to the Midwest and into the eastern woodlands. But a lot of very recent research, even just from this year, it has suggested that it came in multiple pulses, but usually along the same vectors. So it's not like a contemporaneous emergence kind of phenomenon. It's more of straight paths, but in multiple pulses. And these come through things like cultural exchange between different civilizations. Contrary to many popular beliefs, Indigenous peoples are mobile. Like, we like to run around, we like to meet other people. We have all sorts of means of traversing, rivers, lakes, plains, and people would run around. There were advanced trade networks that were happening for hundreds and thousands of years. So it's no surprise that something as glorious and sacred as the relationship between humans and grass that became corn was something that spiritually spread throughout the United States, because some of the oldest stories from peoples in the Southwest talk about part of their original instructions and their creation stories that corn was a part of this. And so even though we know archaeologically that corn emerged and came from elsewhere, these people in their identities and in their religious beliefs and their spiritualities, they understand a primacy of a relationship between the creators and themselves mediated by corn as a blessing both for sustenance and spiritual renewal. Some practices like nixtamalization, which is actually a Shawnee religious practice to this day, also have followed the dissemination and diffusion of corn from Mexico into North America. And here's just a kind of a short list of peoples that still practice nixtamalization to this day. And as I mentioned, like, yes, we do this, for home practice, just for eating, for making hominy because it's delicious, but it's also an intimate part of our ceremonial life. And once again, the nixtamalization process using wood ash to help take the hard pericarp, the skin off the corn, to make it more nutritious, have more vitamins in it, and sustain us more. That's one more way in which we have an intimate care with and relationship with the corn. And so corn was instrumental in the flourishing of multiple civilizations from which our contemporary tribes as we know them emerged. Various mound builder civilizations, the Hopewellians, the Adinas, but most famously Mississippian cultures, like what we find at Cahokia Mounds. This is a rendition of Cahokia Mounds, and this is a picture of Monk's Mound, and that's in Illinois, just east of St. Louis. I highly recommend that you go. Sometimes there are Native and Indigenous events happening there. It is awesome. It is powerful. You will feel it. But this is a place where, like Keitlyn was discussing about the milpa and our relationship to a diversity of non-human relatives and plant relatives, even these mound builder societies like the Fort Ancient culture from which the Shawnees emerged and the Mississippian cultures have these intercropped plant societies of wild plants that were through relationship cultivated and brought together. Things like little barley, maygrass, erect knotweed, chennapods, sunflowers, marsh elder. These all live in tight relationship, and they have chemical relationships as well in terms of what they bring to the soil, draw up from the soil, put into the soil. That most of these plants live as like a designed, a human co-created microecology that brings sustenance to them and to us. So something that you might hear me say repeatedly is Chaki-Elakotiakwe, and that in Shawnee means all our relations are related. Everything is completely related. So the milpa and these intercrop designs are all representative of this Chaki-Elakotiakwe, where the corn might be at the center, first among equals, but to her are drawn so many of these other plant communities. And these plant communities and their use actually predated the use of corn, because corn arrived and it took maybe about 500 years before it became a staple crop for the mound builder cultures like the Mississippians and the Fort Ancients. So we knew it was tasty, beautiful, spiritual, but it took a while for it to become fully adapted to those places. But once it was fully adapted to those places, those civilizations took off, both in terms of population and the complexity of social organization. So corn brings with it not just a spiritual gift, but all sorts of intellectual and social gifts. It reminds us not just of our spiritual connection to Kiki, our Mother Earth, but it also helps give us the sustenance that we need to build out larger social structures. This is just some example of Mississippian culture and Fort Ancient culture revolving around corn once it had been established. These cultures overlapped. They were neighbors. A point of intersection between the Mississippian and the Fort Ancient cultures are actually here in Indiana. So if you drive south towards Evansville, you'll get to Angel Mounds, which is a prominent Mississippian site from which a lot of IU archaeologists and anthropologists have done advanced work, even to this day, using like ground penetrating radar to discover the agricultural systems that were used. But then also the Fort Ancient peoples resided in southeastern Indiana at a place that has also been heavily archaeologically analyzed by IU scholars, which is Wyandotte Cave in Crawford County. I'm also very lucky and blessed to have tobacco seeds that came from one of the archaeological excavations at Wyandotte Cave, which is growing in our backyard. So love to have me some pre-Columbian tobacco. So it looked like the Mesoamerican milpa system, Northern Native American cultures embraced corn, not just as the Mississippian and Fort Ancient cultures did with those diverse polycultures, but they also, you hear a lot about the Three Sisters. And this is like a very prominent Eastern woodlands, Northern woodlands agricultural system where corn is at the center. The bean crawls up the corn and helps put nitrogen in the ground for the corn. And then the squash spread out and they cool the soil, trap moisture, and keep pests away, like raccoons hate it, those little spines. We learned this year. We are very glad for our mother squash. But so green corn ceremonies that celebrate specifically the ripening of the corn, these usually happen around August, at least in Oklahoma, but they happen all over the place. So we have historical depictions, historical photographs, and even contemporary demonstrations of dance from the Southwest all the way to the Eastern woodlands, displaying the ceremonial reverence and importance of corn in structuring ceremonial life and structuring social organization. For the Shawnees in particular, what I've been involved with is to help save Shawnee corns. There was a long time where, because of climate change and poor soil conditions, the advancement of ranching in Oklahoma, it became harder and harder for my people to grow our corn. But it's very important for our ceremonies. Like, we absolutely need this. And there's a way in which just about any corn can become sacred through the ceremonial acts and prayers that we put on it. But to have that original relationship and to have this old corn, the corn that's been passed around, and the corn here that's on the right, it came all the way from Ohio. So when we were removed from our homelands, it came with us to Kansas, and it fed us, and it came with us to Missouri. It fed us in Missouri. It came with us to Kansas. It fed us in Kansas. It came with us to Oklahoma and fed us in Oklahoma. Some of our branches actually ended up in Texas and down in Mexico, but before making it back to Oklahoma. And so Tommy Nakeithi has been with us since Coquelin forever. I mean, it's part of our understanding of where we come from. When we were created, we were given corn, fire, and language. And the corn is our bond, our living relationship that connects us directly to Kikina-Hasiskitha, connects us directly to the Creator. So again, that's why it features in all of our major ceremonies, our spring and fall bread dance and our green corn ceremony. So we have intense spirituality built around that corn, and it organizes the way that we structure our spirituality, our religious cycles, and all of this is in tune with the agricultural cycle. Our spring bread dance welcomes in the spring and renews our relationships with our plant communities and our corn specifically. Our green corn ceremony celebrates that the corn has come to fruition at last, and those roasting ears we can pick off, we can stew, we can eat them right away. And the fall bread dance, we are so grateful for our harvest that we know is going to help us make it through the winter. We also have social organization that's structured by our medicinal corn, the red blue corn. This is part of our buffalo dance ceremony. It's our medicine dance. And so when people in the tribe are sick or there's some kind of problem going on, we make sure to try to have a buffalo dance. And we need to have this corn to make the medicine mush that's distributed and eaten, consumed as part of the dance. So that structures more of our medicinal way of life, and the cycles by which we are able to have our medicinal ceremonies. The blue corn or black corn is more of like a familial corn. I'm told that it's used for personal feasts and for things like death feasts, feasts on the anniversaries of people's passings, either the day they passed or their birthdays. Different families do it differently. But so that corn also helps structure our social life by being something that's a connection, either for every day or for personal familial moments that are special. And then we have an intertribal corn. And this is what I referred to, and that many of you here in this room help plant at the Healing Gardens. This intertribal corn structures social relationships outside of our tribal life. And so what it does, this intertribal corn is one of union, one of alliance. So the legend of this corn is that it was born in Prophetstown, Indiana, during the time of a religious movement led by Tenskwatawa the prophet and defended by his brother Tecumseh the warrior. And so the movement was all around the abandoning of commercial and industrial settler ways, a return to indigenous spiritualities, a return to indigenous values, a return to indigenous languages. It's a movement that has echoes still today. There are pushes for this. And so for Shawnee culture, Tenskwatawa's movement was very important. And there were 15 to 18 other tribes that came from all over the South, the Southeast, the Midwest, the upper Midwest, to be part of this alliance and be part of the spiritual movement. And what did they do? They did like Native folks do. They brought their corn to eat it, to share it, and to plant it. And when all that corn was planted in one space, one close space, It all mixed. Corn is promiscuous. It likes to cross-pollinate. It's very adaptive. It does this well. And so you can see all the different colors and all the different textures in those corns. Each one of those colors, each one of those textures represents a people, represents a belief, represents a spiritual connection to their corn, their mediator between themselves and creator, their mediator between themselves and the earth. And so not only do we have ceremonial corns that structure life, medicinal corns that structure life, familial corns, but this intertribal one reaches out. It's a corn for anyone that still believes, and anyone that still believes to this day can be part of this corn, can be part of planting this corn, deserves to receive this corn, because we all deserve that connection to Mother Earth, to Kikina Hisiskita. We all deserve to share in that together. It makes us strong together. So it's a very strong corn, very robust. And I was very lengthy. My apologies, Keitlyn.
Lovely. No, I think one of the things that these conversations have emerged from have been these like knowing pieces of the story and not knowing other pieces of the story, and trying to fill in these gaps between this really complicated history of colonialism and like who's moving where and what happens and what stories are missing from books. And so I really, really appreciate the conversation, and I did not know that part. And so now my brain is just spinning out about the significance of these kind of conversations that we're having today. So thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. So I just wanted to bring the conversation back to the Healing Garden, in part because exactly what Ryan is talking about is one of the things that's been like a sticky point, but also I think the goal of the garden. So like I mentioned, I have a lineage that's tied to Central Mexico, but not tied to any kind of indigenous community. Indigeneity in Mexico is really complex, and that it's woven into kind of pop culture and day-to-day life in ways that everyone can claim. And so it's really sticky to try and say like what parts of these are intentional acts of indigeneity versus just like words that are slapped onto foods that everybody eats on the street, right? Like, and so I think through my work both in Mexico and here, and thinking about what it means to try and re-indigenize, this has been a really important thought that I keep coming back to. And so for the Healing Garden, it started during my first spring semester here at IU, which was spring 2021. It was the pandemic, and I was coming off of a couple of years of field work in Mexico that really ruptured with how I had been learning from my graduate program. It was a time that I got to be a lot more in community. It was a time that I got to be a lot more outside. I got to learn about histories from people who were kind of sharing them from their experiences rather than from written things. And it really transformed the way that I was thinking about how I wanted to exist in the world and what I wanted to do with these, this gift of curiosity and knowledge that I had been accumulating for so long, and how we tap into other people's stories that they hold within them, that don't often get a space in higher education institutions. Often we're consuming knowledge and dominating knowledge, but we're not really thinking about what we already have within us. And so the idea behind the Healing Garden was how to create a space that we could exist in during the pandemic, and that we could create community within during the pandemic, but also how to create a space of kind of curiosity and openness for hearing all of these different stories and thinking about all of the ways that we're interconnected through this lens of kind of colonialism, how all of our stories are tied to colonialism in some way. Even if we are from settler populations, even if we are like kind of pieces of us are from, we're all kind of tied to the same history. So how do we confront that in a way that we can have deeper conversations about kind of returning back to ways of being that are not so isolated, not so individualistic. And so the Healing Garden emerged as this place where I was thinking that maybe how I was seeing farmers organize in central Mexico was very shaped by the land and the relationships to plants that they had, and how, like how Ryan is talking about, those structure things like shared meals. When you have to harvest, when you have to do a big task together, you have to collaborate. When you have, moments where the garden or the plants are structuring time, all of the seeds go to seed at once, and you got to collect them, or else they're gonna like fall into the ground, or they're going to be carried off by birds. And so there's these moments that are kind of, the garden shapes us, right? The garden shapes the way that we're moving. And so the experiment with the space was, how do we use that as a way to push back at university rhythms and the ways of learning that have become kind of institutionalized and colonized within the space. This is a resource that we created, I think, within the second year. It's called The Soil, and it's a zine that we created with both community partners and artists and some folks within the university. It's free and available for download, and kind of thinks about all of these thoughts. It's meant to guide people's relationship to place, and has a bunch of activities for all different ages. So if you want to bring your kids, your family, your class to the garden and want to download this, I think it's a great way to kind of introduce them to some of these ideas. Let me just make sure I hit all the points that I meant to say. Yeah, and I think like one of the other things that the garden has done is this kind of excavation of the stories of place. So we do a lot of land acknowledgements, but we don't think about kind of what that means. A lot of times it's very performative. It's very like, we're acknowledging this, but not really thinking about it deeply, so that it permeates all of our actions and all of our existence as we're here in this place. And so through the Healing Garden, I think one of the things that we've been curious about as plants show up, like we have like purslane, which is a plant that's both in the milpa in Mexico and here, and how these plants have moved through time, who brought them, what birds, what insects, how are all these things moving, and how do they kind of tell us about a legacy that our human narratives do not. In this spring, we were able to do our first Healing Garden plus Stella exchange, kind of bringing these two worlds together, where the Healing Garden core team, it's AB, Olga, a graduate student, Margarita, we were able to go to Tlaxcala and kind of learn about the things that inspired the garden in the first place, and kind of start having these conversations across different experiences. So Margarita's from Colombia, Olga's from Greece, AB is from a family that has lived in this region for a really long time. And so we're kind of looking at these stories and learning from one another about how all of these stories are interconnected. And I mean, through the garden, like Ryan mentioned, another big story and another big connection and way the garden has guided these kind of excavations of histories has been through connecting us and kind of leading to this conversation that's more deeply about the colonial histories of Indiana. So I think that's, yeah.
So a little bit of a summary of the colonial history of corn in the Midwest. Text heavy, I know, but the history is important because the relationships that a lot of folks have here growing up with corn, this is the story that they know. They don't know about the indigenous sacred corns that have traversed these lands for thousands of years. They don't know corn's indigenous origins in the Balsas River Valley in Mexico. This is the story that is known, that, from the 1600s to the present even, settlers accept corn as gifts, or they are stolen from native peoples during removals. And then these seeds that have been sacred and cared for in relation for thousands of years then get turned around, copyrighted or patented, or generally just sold by, seedsmen, quote unquote, since the 1600s. And so that's part of the origin story of corn beginning as a gift, or beginning as something that has been stolen and always, immediately commercialized. The Industrial Revolution happened, and the plow became more prolific, and that, of course, radically increased the yields on corn. And so there had to be new ways to use corn because we were producing so much of it. From 1850 to 1893, cultivar diversity slows industry's need for uniformity. So, trains were coming along, all sorts of different modes of transportation were coming along that made it easier to transport agricultural goods. But industry always has the same mantra. It's all about homogeneity. So they needed to get rid of the diversity of the things that signified different identities of different culture groups, things that signified and embodied different sacred traditions. And instead, the corns were bred to be more uniform to fit industrial practices. The first corn that really took off to do this and really helped collapse diversity in corn populations was James Reed's yellow dent corn, which won the World's Fair Blue Ribbon in 1893. And between 1893 and 1929, U.S. land grant policy, hybrid breeding technologies, and synthetic fertilizers, like the discovery of the Haber-Bosch process that allows for synthetic nitrogen to be created and prolific. These also, of course, dramatically increase the supply of corn. And so there had to be how do we market this? How do we keep corn flowing into different economies outside of its original use, outside of its original intent, outside of its original histories? How do we get it into the economy, the modern economy, in a different way? And in 1929, of course, we had the Dust Bowl. And between the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and World War II, the United States government decided to start subsidizing all sorts of industrial and commercial corn growing, which further homogenized the diversity of corn that was existent in the United States and led to a lot of things like excess supply. And so use is diversified. This is when we start to see things like corn syrup emerge. We see a lot of national promoted advertising around corn, the food of the nation. It was food that was originally fed to prisoners, to slaves, to poor people, and it was food that poor people could grow and live off of and subsist off of. But now, with it being abundantly produced industrially, it really crowded out a lot of people who were subsisting on this as a life way and as a relationship, and instead made them dependent on commodity corn. So that was one way in which the industrialization process stripped the last vestiges of people in the United States that were still living in relationship, living in mutual dependence with this creature, with this being that we have always had a relationship with, that came and emerged and lives through a relationship with us, that was stripped from these people. And so it was many indigenous communities that kept growing their old corns, even when indigenous religions were illegal until the 1970s in this great land of religious freedom. Our people were told that we couldn't have our prayers. Our people were told that we couldn't have our corns, that we couldn't have our ceremonies. So our prayers became talks and our ceremonies became gatherings. But more and more, as we've emerged out of this age, we reclaim these gatherings as ceremonies, as spiritual religious practices. We reclaim these corns as part of our identity, part of our relationship, part of both our physical relationship with Kikina Hasistita and part of our relationship with Metela Takakiana, our creator. These things are coming back, and it's a beautiful thing. But between World War II and the 1970s, all that war created all these chemicals that were just great for industrial farming. You can make bombs of ammonium nitrate, and then you can use the excess to plug into your fields. What are we going to do with all this war waste left over? Well, let's pump it into some industrial corn. What are we going to do with all this leftover supply of this industrial corn? Well, we're going to turn it into corn syrup and put it in everything you eat, and we're going to use it in the Cold War. During it's part of our policy regime. This is how we controlled trade. This is how we helped to bring about another layer, another level, another extension of colonization around the world during the Cold War. And from the 1970s, when Arthur Midland invents corn ethanol during the oil shocks under Nixon's regime, this other industrial use for corn as an ethanol fuel has grown as well. And we, of course, many of us have seen firsthand the effects of these economies, this perversion of our relationship with this beautiful spiritual being and our sustenance being, and how that has turned into industrial products. And many native people around the world, from Mesoamerica to South America to Greece to Africa to the heartland here in this day, you're looking at one of them fighting to bring these back, bring these relationships back, bring that spirituality back. And so that's why I'm so delighted to be in partnership with Keitlyn, making this happen for real. She helped bring back that Tenskwatawa corn. And without this project, without the Healing Gardens, we would not have that. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like for real. You can see all those different colors in that corn seed bag that was laying out on the ground. You can see all the products of this that came from the Healing Gardens. This space is real. It's not an idea. It is a real practice. It is a social practice. It is an ecological practice. It's a practice in alliance building. It's a practice in relationship building. And this is a space where we personally have connected to our plant relatives, to these ancient and sacred corns, to these corns of legends, to these wonderful human beings that share all of this with us. So, Keitlyn mentioned the idea of indigenizing a space. And so how do we do this? The work that she's doing already is breaking the ground on this. We have created and carved out a space where folks like me and folks like you can come and lay hands on this corn, and you can feel that connection. You can feel that old alliance. You can feel that old spirit. How many spirits in this corn? Count the colors, count the textures. That's how many peoples, how many cultures, how much spirituality, how much love over thousands of years have been put into this corn, and you are a part of it now too. So to indigenize to a space, respect the seasonal cycles, try to eat in season, try to be aware of the plants that are around you, try to be able to identify the various beings that you live with, whether they're birds or crawling critters, whether they're bugs or whether they're plants. You know their names, know their uses, know what they have been here for, because they are just as important as we are. We cannot exist without these relationships. We cannot exist without being completed by acknowledging and staying in relationship with these beings. And a special shout out to this one, AB. I wish they were here.
They're virtually here.
They're virtual. Oh yes, hello AB. I'm so glad you're virtually here, because you absolutely, in my personal experience, represent what it means to indigenize to a space. You have become so in love with and so familiar with all of the different people, these plant people, these animal people, and you, I know, have deep knowledge, respect, and relationship with them as you work and help maintain and create this space every day, every week. So special thanks to AB as someone that can embody as an example what it means to indigenize to a space. Not everyone can become indigenous. Not everyone has been autochthonous, emergent from this space, but we can reclaim that kind of relationship. We can understand that kind of relationship by being involved with things like the Healing Garden, by doing things like laying hands on this kind of a corn, and just rekindling those kinds of relationships. So hope I didn't take it too far, sister.
No, I think we're perfect, because now we get to invite you to the Maize Gathering. So this is going to be 2 days in October, the 17th and the 18th. We're going to open with a panel that will also be on Zoom. So if you can't be here physically, you can watch it, and we'll see if we can record it as well, so that folks can watch it later. And this is bringing together folks from the Midwest, Great Lakes region, from Greece, from Mexico. So we're going to have a very interesting conversation across these spaces to kind of kick off the week. We have a Maize Stories event at the IU Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Says by invitation only. If you are interested in coming, please let me know and we'll put you on the list. So the idea is to just get people together who are really interested in rebuilding these networks, for whatever way you want to do that. And so it will be a smaller group, a space for dialogue and for learning about projects that are in the region and kind of building this network, this web of folks. And then on Saturday, we will have an open house at the Healing Garden. We'll be there from 11 to 3, and we'll have a series of talks in the main building, but you're also just welcome to come and wander. I think we'll probably have some like art activities. We always have seeds. We always have teas. You can build bouquets, however you want to show up and be there. We would love to see you there. This is the lineup of folks who are going to be sharing their experiences and knowledge. Really excited to bring them all together. It's going to be a really, I think when we were planning it, we said, how do we get like all of our corn heroes and people that we're excited about in the same place to start this? Hopefully this will become a thing that we do often, because it's been really exciting to pull together for this first year. So here's a little info. We have one of the events live, so you can add it to your calendar. The other one should be live later today, so look out for it, and I'll send emails to everybody to get them, to get all of the sponsors to disseminate this information far and wide. One other event that is not listed here that I want to make folks aware of, from one of our sponsors, is a fancy dinner that they're hosting that for the whole time that he's here. And in exchange, we offered to create the space for raising money for the Sobre Mesa Foundation. So if you are interested, there are still tickets available. This would be Saturday after the open house at the Healing Garden. You can go have a delicious feast at Sobre Mesa Farm and help support the Sobre Mesa Foundation. And again, such a vast, so these are our financial funders from the university, but the web of folks who have been supporting this in ways that are not with university money are also like immense. And I don't know if you want to invite anybody else in as acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for supporting this. Yeah, we really appreciate it. How much are the tickets for the farm meal?
They're 200, so they are they're it's a fundraising event. But yeah, so we'll have food in other places as well if you want to show up. But this is a special event. And I just want to share some more resources for you. Take a screenshot. Go check these things out if you want to learn more about the things that we're talking about today. I think we have like 4 minutes, but I think both happy to stick around if we want to have conversation, discussion. Thank you all for being here. And
Might have some questions here or online. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I think I have a question, especially because I actually almost went into bioarchaeology myself after I graduated undergrad.
yeah.
And so this is more of a general question for you, I guess, is, I kind of, I think one dynamic that a lot of people have been pointing out more recently, which is something that certainly I've kind of grown to understand, is like academia is like, as kind of an extractive industry in and of itself. And I kind of, so I guess it's more of like a general question, but, I guess what are your thoughts on like how to kind of, get around that while not just pushing academia out?
It's a very timely question because hopefully tonight I'm sending in the final pages of my book manuscript that is all about this and how I started in bioarchaeology. And I think for me, I was brought up in a field that did dietary isotope studies, and there's a lab and you collect samples from the actual like physical remains in the field. And it was like human bodies that were buried at the site in Mexico that were then brought back here to the US. It was a very complex kind of process of trying to figure out what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I think I started doing it out of that fear of being in higher education. Like, this is how you do science and this is how you're supposed to do this, right? But I also think in that particular context, it was something that there was no community opposition or offense directly from the folks who were in the descendant community. I think that's an important part. Another important part is that I have moved away from a lot of bioarchaeology to say, I did that once, look at all I can grow from it without doing it again, without having to keep like adding more and more collections to draw from. Just that one opportunity gave me enough to know that I can learn from other sources as well. So a lot of what I've been doing has been learning from plants, learning from zooarchaeological collections, learning from archives, learning from talking to people, learning from planting myself and seeing what happens. So I think that a lot of times these narratives that we actually learn from doing vast amounts of, like, we need to collect everything and study everything. We need to diversify everything. We need to study it from a lot of different perspectives to see the depth of it rather than, necessarily like having 700 individuals in the collection of data. I can learn really complex things from like 5, yeah.
And also, like as Richard mentioned, like as is part of the mission of the IIK, like it's part of this wave of community engaged scholarship. And so I know that my chief Ben Barnes and one of our tribal historians, Stephen Warren, have wrote extensively on that. I think a new book on that. Remaining Ourselves. No, that's the one on music. Anyway, so there's a recent book on community engaged scholarship. Actually, they helped derive the idea while they were here for a conference. And part of the notion of that community engaged scholarship is, how are we going into a community to have relationships? And we'll learn from relationships with plants, relationships with foodways, relationships with elders, relationships with kids. And through those relationships, we learn things. We don't go like with a magnifying glass, standing far away and saying like, what can I get from you? What can I extract from you? Community engaged scholarship is about relationships. It's that Chakiyelakotio play put into a methodological practice. And then beyond that, it's not just, are my practices embedded in a relationship, but is the community that I am engaged with, are they benefiting, right? Or is it just me benefiting, either for personal career or for benefiting like a research organization, or for benefiting the university? Like, what are they getting out of this? So if the research can be a two-way street, even for us, there's research that's ongoing about recovering old songs that some people have forgot to sing. And the IU Archive of Traditional Music houses a vast repository of Shawnee information on language, songs, ceremonies, etc. And so part of my work has been to go into those archives and try to find these old songs, clean up the audio. And that's a way of doing research that's knowledge work, but it's not extractive. Actually, I'm extracting all that information from the university, and then I'm transmuting it back into the community as a gift. So it's methodological and around relationships, but it's also outcomes based, like what is the community getting from your work?
And the book is Replanting Cultures, Community Engaged Scholarship in Indian Country.
Thank you. Replanting Cultures. Nyewe. Poti nyewe, poleti niwa.
I saw there were some things maybe in the chat. Are there any questions?
Thanks.
Okay.
No, there are times.
Okay.
I have a question, if I may. Would you mind talking a little bit more about the transition from the grass to the spiritual use of the maize?
So, I mean, I don't understand specifically the exact time scale through which the relationship between Teosinte and human beings produced the corn. I'm sure it took thousands of years. But as we noted in one of the slides, the word Teosinte or Teosinte, it comes from an indigenous Nahuatl community. In their language, it's Teosinte, which means grass of the gods. So even when it was a grass, it was still recognized as something that had a unique connection with the creator and a unique connection with people. And so from that beginning, it seems that there was a relationship that was prioritized. And so through lots of just spending time with the plant, getting more used to it, picking out the kernels and picking out the seeds that you liked the most, that were the tastiest or that did the best that year, just through that slow process of personal selection, cultural selection, this grass grew more and more into being like a corn. And so I think in one of the slides towards the end, it's disconnected. Towards the beginning, it shows a Teosinte and through to like a proto maize, proto corn. So that process was purely relational, and it was about how people related with this in a specific environment, and through that specific environment and that long-term relationship, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
I have some nerdy knowledge that.
Please infuse.
Yeah. So maize is, and we just talked about this in class. So maize is a plant that emerged, or these grasses are a plant that emerged because of climate shifts, intense climate shifts. So maize specifically is a plant that can survive droughts. There's a lot of the plants that are part of the milpa and that are spiritually significant because they are the only things that exist when everything else dies. Mm-hmm. So things like amaranths, like maize, wild greens. And so there's this, I think probably a lot of the spirituality is how they literally give you life. They literally are the thing that will allow you to survive in moments of extreme drought where it doesn't rain for years. And so I think the selection of this plant that like maybe it just had a few kernels here and you were just scavenging and just trying to survive off of whatever was there eventually led to this relationship because Central Mexico in this region is a place that has really intense climate shifts, that has a lot of drought, that has a lot of like instability. And so a lot of the corn cultures that have emerged in that region have done so by adapting specifically to microclimates. There are like over 170 different corns that exist now, probably I could say like 5-10 times that probably existed at different points in time because people have built really specific relationships to corn and continue to build really specific relationships to corn by paying attention to the place where they live, by being really connected to the ecosystem that they're living in.
Yeah,
Always,
I was wondering if there's some research that is discussing more about
I recommend Daniel Sizumbo Villarreal. I can pass you the info, but this is a scholar who works in Mesoamerica, has written a whole bunch. If you want to get like in the nitty gritty of like maize relationships, I can give you a reading list.
And I may add, so one of the resources they have at the end from Conavio from Mexico has a whole page on Teocintle specifically, and there's a video about the evolution. It's listed. Yeah, the bottom right, Biodiversidad Mexicana, that has a whole, there's a whole section of it and where it still lives and things like that.
Other question, final question, is there any online? Okay. Well, I want to thank you two first of all. Yeah, thank you very much. I just